gorgeous people, it's Amber. Welcome back to my channel. So today's video is a little bit different from what I normally do, but I'm always thinking outside the box. And my fiance gave me one of his sweaters that he didn't want anymore because he never wore it. So I was like, okay, great. Let me see what I can do with this. So it's a size extra large in men's, which clearly I needed to take it down to my size, which is a small. And I went ahead and took the sweater in first. And then I'm looking at it and I thought to myself, what if I make it a dress? And I don't make it as be like just a regular sweater anymore. So that's where the ties came into play. I bought this lot of ties on eBay months ago and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. It was just a really great deal. And I thought, I can do something with these ties. At first I thought a skirt, and then I thought a dress, and then I set them aside and didn't touch them again until now. So when he gave me that sweater, I thought it would be a nice accent to the bottom of the sweater. And then I thought, let's just accent the rest of the sweater with these gorgeous ties that I got off of eBay. So that's what you're going to see today. You're going to see how I made this dress out of a men's sweater and ties. Why not? Fashion is subjectable and can be whatever you want it to be. So my fashion goes in all different areas, including the men's department, the kids department, the women's department, wherever. I even shop in plus size a lot too, because I can use a lot of the fabric in the plus size department and get maybe a couple of outfits out of one pair of pants or whatever. So don't restrict your shopping, I guess is the moral of that story. Shop in all departments. Figure out what size you are, because I am a small person, so I'm really short, and it's hard for me to find pants that fit me perfectly without having to hem them. And I figured out in my shopping ventures that I am a size 16 and boys fit perfectly. I don't have to take in the waist. I don't have to do anything to the bottom. They fit perfect. So I shop in the boys department for my pants. They fit perfect. And just a little note for those of you who don't know, when you shop any of the men's or boys department for pants and you're a woman, it makes your booty poppin'. I mean, your booty is poppin' in those pants. So try it out. Figure out what size you are. Go to the fitting room, grab a couple of different sizes that look like they might fit, and I think you'll be surprised at how good they're going to fit you. So at any rate, now that I've completely derailed my intro, which is not unusual for me, let's get into how I made this awesome dress out of a men's sweater and ties. Okay guys, materials are in the description box below. We're going to start by making this sweater so that it'll fit me. The first thing I want to do is go ahead and start with the sleeves. So I'm taking a sweater that I know where the sleeves fit me well, and I'm going to use that as my template to cut the sleeves for this sweater. So what I'm doing here is I'm just finding out how short the sleeve needs to be. So I'm estimating where it needs to be, about right there looks good. So I go ahead and I just cut it off. Now that I got that part cut, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the width is the way that I need it to be as well. And as you can see, there's a little bit of excess on the bottom there, so I'm just going to cut that as well. Now I'm also leaving enough room for seam allowance. You always want to make sure you leave a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch seam allowance anytime you're cutting anything. So now that that one's done, I'm going to go ahead and use that as my template to mirror that exact same sleeve for my other sleeve. So I just sit it on top and cut around. Now there's no need to leave seam allowance when you've already left the seam allowance for one. You don't need to do it for the second one. It's already done. You cut it to the exact size as that one that you just did. Okay, now that all that is done, I'm going to go ahead, take the sleeve, turn it inside out, and I'm going to add some pins, and I'm just going to go ahead and stitch down that side of the sleeve so that it's ready to go to be attached once I finish the body. So just going to go ahead, take my straight pins all the way down. Once I have it pinned, I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other sleeve, then take it to the sewing machine and sew it together. Perfect. Now they're both sewn together. I'm going to set them aside for now, and I'm going to go ahead and work on the body of my sweater. So I'm going to take a sweater dress that I know fits me well, use that for my template, and I'm just cutting the body here. So I'm going to go ahead and just fold those sleeves in. Don't need to worry about those. So I'm just going to do the exact same thing I did before. I'm going to cut around, making sure that I leave enough room for seam allowance, a 1/2 inch to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just going to cut around this for my template. Super simple, guys. No need to make these things hard. Okay, now that I have that all cut around, I'm going to go ahead, flip it inside out. And then I'm going to take one of those sleeves that I just cut, and I'm going to make sure that I leave enough room for the sleeve where the armhole is going to be. Once I figure out where that is going to be, I go ahead and stick a pin in it to mark that spot, so I know when I'm going to sew down these sides here, which I'm about to do, I do not want to go past that pin. So I'm going to go ahead, fold it in half, make sure it's in the exact same spot on the other side as well. Looking pretty good. Now that I've done that, I'm going to flip that other side back out and then go ahead and just pin down the sides. Again, I'm just going to pin until I get to that pin that I have marked where I need to stop. So I'm going to go ahead and pin down this side, I'll pin down the other side, and I will stitch those together, making sure that I stop at that marked pin so that I do not sew up my armhole. And sorry about the lighting, guys. I will get this lighting thing right, I promise, but I'm working in a new space, so I'm still figuring it out. Okay, now that all that's done, it's all sewn together, we are going to go ahead and attach our sleeves. So I'm going to take the sleeve that is right side out. I'm going to flip it underneath the shirt, which is inside out, so that I can sew them right sides together. So I'm just going to go ahead and go around and pin that arm sleeve right into place. Yeah, lighting's getting bad here too, and as always, I apologize. Still figuring it out. I promise I will get this under control in this new spot, but it was just not working out for me in this video. So now that I have it all pinned, I always turn my things right side out to make sure it's looking the way I want it to. Looks pretty good. Going to do the exact same thing to the other side, stitch them on. There we go. Everything's ready to go with this part of the process. Now the next thing I'm going to do is take my ties. We're ready for the ties. So I already know how long I need them because I put the sweater on and then just kind of measured where, the length that I needed the ties to be. So that's where I cut it, measured them all into place. And now I'm going to go ahead and take that little inside part out of this tie so that I can use it for a belt loop. So I'm just showing you here, that's what I'm doing. There you go. I'm going to put it in half so I can put a belt loop on each side of the sweater. Just prepping that. We'll set it aside for later. Now we're going to move on to attaching the ties. So the best way that I think to do this is go ahead and start in the middle. So I'm measuring where the middle is, and then I'm just going to pin that tie into place. Okay, now that I have the middle marked, I'm going to flip it over and mark, put the tie for the back side in that exact same spot. I just feel like it's going to be easier to start from the middle with this project. Okay, so now that I have that done, I'm just going to fill the rest of the space in with the ties. So this is all I'm doing here. So as you can see, I'm using the bigger parts of the ties because I use the bigger part and the smaller part of the tie on each end when I cut them. So I'm just taking these bigger parts and I'm just putting them across first. And once I find where I want those, I'm taking that smaller end of the tie and I'm putting that in between those parts. I just want to make it look a little bit more full, so that's why I chose to do it this way. You don't have to use the smaller end, it's entirely up to you, but that's just how I felt that this looked better, so that's what I decided to do. So I cut the exact same length on each tie, or each end of the tie. So the smaller end and obviously the wider end is what I decided to use for this project. And it looks like it's filling it up pretty good. So this is the exact same process I did all the way around the bottom of the sweater here. So I'm just going to pin all of this into place on the front side as well as the back side. Okay, everything's all pinned into place. So here's my front, I think, or my back, not sure. One of the two, and then I flip it over and that's the other side. Okay, we're looking pretty good. Everything's where I want it to be. So now we need to start sewing it together. Now because this is too thick, I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way, and I'm just going to hand sew it on. Now this is the way that I choose to hand sew. I'm just going to go ahead and feed this through the one part of the tie there, as you can see, and then I'm just going to go over, under, over, under, over, under, just like the old days used to do. When they didn't have sewing machines, you just hand stitched. And this is I don't know what this stitch is called, but this is the stitch that I feel will be best for this process. So I'm sure that any professional seamstress would be like, that's not the right way to do it. That's the way I decided to do it. That's the way I thought that it would be best attached well and wouldn't come off. So that's how I decided to do this all the way around the bottom of what's now my dress. Okay, so now you see that's all stitched on. Everything is not ready to go, but that part is completely stitched on. So I'm going to move on to the next part. So I want to take the belt loops and put them into place. So this is really hard for me to show you on camera. I just wanted to include it so you knew what I did, but I just did an invisible stitch here. So that's all I'm doing. I'm just kind of taking a little bit of the belt loop and then a little piece of the sweater and stitching the belt loop into place. Like I said, I really struggled doing this on camera, so I contemplated whether or not to include it, but I felt that it was important that you knew how I attached them. So I'm not sure if this was helpful or not, but I decided to include it, so that's what I did. Just an invisible stitch on each side. Of course, I put the sweater on, figured out where I wanted the belt loops to hit, marked them with a pin, and then I stitched it into place. That's how I determined how high up I needed to go on the side. And I'm just sewing it right into the seam there. So wherever your side seam is, that's where you want to put it on. So here I'm just tying everything off, and then I'm just going to attach the rest of it. Okay, belt loops attached, and that's not the belt I ended up using, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what I was going for. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to work on the collar. So I took parts from the other ties that I already cut, decided what two parts kind of sort of looked best together, I guess you could say. And those are what I'm going to go ahead and add to the collar of this sweater, because to me it just needed more. It was way too plain for me. So I'm taking the wider end and I'm going to have that as the front part of the collar. So I'm just literally folding it where the ties are already folded and just pinning it into place. I feel like that's the easiest way to do it. Now I did include that lining that was inside the tie because I felt that it gave the collar some structure that it really needed. So I did go ahead and leave that inside the tie on both sides because, like I said, I felt that it needed it for structure to make it look more like a collar. So I'm just going to pin this one side till we get to the middle, and then I'm going to go ahead and take that other piece and do the exact same thing, putting the wider end in the front and then pinning it into place in the same manner I just did that other side. Pretty simple. So when I get to the back part, of course, I want to stitch those two halves together. So I'm just trying to figure out here, lining everything up, and then I'm just going to stick a pin in it. And then I just end up taking that to the sewing machine and sewing it together so that part's just ready to go. Don't want to have to worry about it anymore. So as you can see right here, I have it pinned with the wrong sides together, but when I take it to the sewing machine, I just flip it inside out and stitch it down. So I'm just kind of finagling it here, getting an idea of what it's going to look like, making sure it looks the way I think it should, and then I'm pretty much ready to start. Okay, so there you go. I went ahead and did an invisible stitch all the way around on this as well. Sorry, I don't have the footage of that, but that's all I did. So the collar is attached, and I'm going to go ahead and attach some accents to the sleeves using two other different ties. So the same process, guys. I'm just going to go ahead and stitch these two halves together on my sewing machine. As you can see, I stitched the halves together. So now I'm going to do the exact same process that I did with the collar. Although I do have footage of this one, so you can kind of see what I did. Same thing, invisible stitch, but I put when you do it this way, you put it the way that you want it to be. So you don't flip it inside out or anything like that because you're doing an invisible stitch. So when you do an invisible stitch, you go ahead and just, insert your needle and thread, of course, and then you're just going to take a small piece of each side of the fabric. So a small piece of tie, a small piece of the sweater, and you just stitch it into place. It's like the stitch completely disappears as you're stitching it around. So I do this for both sides of the sleeve here. I add the collar on. So there you go. It's all almost attached, but when I got to that center part, now that I know how much I'm going to need to finish it, I'm good with going ahead, pinning it down, and cutting off whatever excess I have. I don't like to cut off the excess until I'm 100% sure of what that's going to be, because I don't want to mess it up. So now that I know, there you go, stitch it together, ready to go, all attached. And I just attached that at the bottom. I did not stitch it down on the top. So did the same thing to the other side. So of course we want to cover up all those stitches that we did on the bottom. So I'm going to do the exact same process. I just took 2 more ties, and I like how the tie is wider at one end and then it goes thinner on the bottom. So I'm going to leave it that way. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight all the way across. As I've said many times, fashion is subjective. You can do whatever you feel like works for you. So in this scenario, I felt that it looked good with a wider end as it got thinner all the way down. So that's how I decided to stitch it on. And I also did an invisible stitch to hand stitch this into place as well. This will not fit through my sewing machine. It was just too thick. The sweater was too thick. The ties were too thick. So this was a lot of hand stitching for me, and I've not hand stitched in a long time. Not this much anyways. So as you can see, I'm doing the invisible stitch all the way around this at the top and bottom to secure this into place. So after this, it's done. How exciting is that? Boom. I think it looks gorgeous. Love how it turned out. Yay! Okay, so that was an interesting venture for me. I had to do a lot of hand sewing with this one, which I haven't done in a really long time. I just couldn't put that thick sweater through my sewing machine, so I had to hand sew a lot of it. And you know what, fun fact is that I was a hand sewer, hardcore hand sewer, up until my mom bought me a sewing machine. My mom bought me a sewing machine because she saw me, I was making blankets for this nursing home, and all these blankets that I was making, I was literally hand sewing all of these blankets start to finish. And it didn't take me as long, but my arms were so extremely sore. And I just had this mentality that if I used the sewing machine, then the sewing machine made the blanket. I didn't make the blanket. I mean, this nursing home was ordering like a lot of blankets for me. They were like 20 blankets at a time or whatever. Anyways, I was hand sewing all of them, and my mom's like, you know, you really should try using the sewing machine. So she bought it for me, and it sat and sat and sat. Finally, I decided to use it, and oh my gosh, am I so glad that I did. That was probably the best thing that I ever did. And then it just kind of flourished from there. So I went from doing the blankets to revamping clothes, and here we are today, you know, pretty crazy. But at any rate, I had to do a lot of hand sewing with this because the sweater was so thick. So pretty much all of the additional things that I added to the sweater, I had to hand sew all of that. So it was a little bit more time consuming than I expected it to be, but I absolutely love the way that it turned out. And you know, it's so fun to work with things that you normally don't work with. I've never worked with ties before, and I actually bought a lot of bow ties on eBay at the same time that I bought these neckties. So look forward to a DIY with those as well. That's going to be coming up soon because I have a really great idea. I saw a top that Heidi Klum had on America's Got Talent recently, and it had these bows on it. So I thought, oh my gosh, my bow ties would be great to reinvent that top. So I'm probably going to be doing something similar. Of course, mine won't look exactly like hers by any stretch of anybody's imagination, but look forward to that DIY in the future. So I hope that you found this helpful or useful in some way and get inspired to make something out of your clothes, or maybe your husband's clothes, or maybe your kids' clothes, or you order something crazy on eBay, like a whole lot of 50 ties, and make something fun out of it. I hope that's what you do. So at any rate, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, like, share, do all of those things to help other people find this channel. If you are a new subscriber, let me know. I would love to tell you thank you, and I want to thank everybody who's followed me so far. This has been so much fun, and I hope that I can continue to make these videos for you. So that's all I got for this time, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Bye! That's, wow, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so, oh my God, I don't know what I want to say. What the heck? Okay, so that was an interesting venture for me. Like, I had to do a lot of hand sewing, which I have not done for a long time. I was a hardcore hand... Try it again. Okay, so that was a venture for me. I had to do a lot of hand sewing with this. What? What? My sewing machine, my first sewing machine was bought by my mom.